We will now start. So welcome to this webinar organized by EU Tech. Let me first briefly introduce myself and the association. My name is Emmanuel Mounier. I am the Secretary General of EU Travel Tech. Our association represents in Brussels the travel tech industry. So that will be the online travel agencies such as Booking.com, eDreams, Trendline, Expedia, the meta search engines such as Skyscanner, but also B2B players such as the global distribution systems with EUs or Travelport, and the travel management companies with companies as Catson, Wagonlit, or Amex GBT. We're representing in Brussels those travel intermediates who are powering the travel distribution ecosystem. And we have started this series of webinars now 4 months ago. Travel Your Way, the Way Forward, the Sustainable Forum, and all those webinars had for common feature to talk about issues which were both between how tech could contribute to a more sustainable travel. And we're very happy to conclude this series of webinars today with a webinar dedicated to distribution, which is part of the European Year of Rail, unleashing rail distribution to rail travel more attractive. So I'm very excited about this webinar. I'm sure have a very interesting session, and I will already hand over to Dave Keating, moderator for today's discussion. Have a good day, a good webinar, and over to you, Dave.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel. So yes, this is the last in our series. We've been exploring different aspects of ticketing, and I've been guiding us all through these conversations. So my name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels. I cover transport issues, also environment and energy issues. And today we're going to be talking about rail travel, which is a personal passion of mine. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Now, here in the EU, we know that policymakers have set a headline goal of encouraging more sustainable transport. And many people say that modal shift will be needed for that. That is, switching people away from more polluting transport modes into more sustainable transport modes. Now, encouraging a modal shift from road and air to rail has long been a goal. But for many years, efforts to increase rail ridership and, in particular, increase cross-border rail routes in Europe have languished. However, the new EU Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy is giving a breath of life to this objective by making rail transport the cornerstone of a more multimodal transport network in Europe. Now, on top of the implementation of the fourth railway package and the opening of domestic rail markets to competition, the European Commission is setting as an objective to expand the rail market by making rail travel more attractive. Distribution is clearly flagged in this regard as a key issue for member states, the rail sector, and the European Commission. The idea is that rail tickets should be made easier to use and to buy. And to this aim, a rail ticketing initiative is planned for 2022 from the European Commission. However, what should be done remains very much open to discussion. The industry has already collectively shared its views in a joint industry statement, and member states have started a collective reflection through the Platform on International Rail Passenger Transport. The European Commission, though, still has many options on the table. So we're here today to talk about all those different options. How do we actually facilitate rail travel? How do we make it easier to get tickets, particularly across different railways and in different countries? We're going to start out with a keynote presentation, and then we're going to go on to our panel of experts to really dive into this issue. And you guys at home will be able to participate in this conversation as well. You can use the Q&A feature on Zoom to ask your questions, and I'll be reading them out to the panelists at the end of the panel. So let's go to our keynote speech first from Hinne Groot, who is chair of the International Rail Platform with the Dutch Ministry of Transport. Hinne?
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And I would like to thank you a lot for inviting me to this seminar. I am chairing, together with the Austrian colleagues, the Platform of International Rail Transport. Since the establishment of the platform, the EU Travel Tech and the partners have been very active in contributing to the to our platform and to make this part of the agenda. So that's a big thanks for that. And there is, of course, a difficult time for railways, but I recall from the platform that this is the issue we talk about today is one of the key issues where we can make progress already in short term. So maybe if you can show my slides, what we have done is starting in 2020, this is the right slide. Starting in 2020, my state secretary, Stientje van Veldhoven, put forward to the other ministers the issue of putting international rail passenger travel higher on the European agenda, and to ask for cooperation between member states and European Commission and railway sector and other stakeholders to make this a success. So the background of this, it was already mentioned by you as well, Dave. Indeed, the climate change is a key issue why we have to act on this. And we see that transport is taking 25% of greenhouse gas emissions, and a reduction of 90% is expected in 2050. And for this, a modal shift to sustainable transport modes and predominantly railways is a key element of this change, we believe. And then in the next slide, I'll show you, this is a bit a Dutch analysis where we have been investigating rail travel is, let's say, optimized at domestic level already for a long time. But we also want to look at this from international perspective, and where can rail take over more passengers at medium to long distances. So here you see the picture where our analysis shows that rail should have a good chance of getting more passengers from those destinations which are currently served in many cases by aviation. So very visible is, of course, Brussels-Paris, and this is already a very mature market. London, there have been new connections with high speed and with non-stop connections, so that is a really huge potential. And then into Germany, we have already connections with those places, Düsseldorf, Frankfurt, Berlin. But we look both on improvements on travel time and in frequencies to have an even better product. So that is our analysis, where we showed that until 700 kilometers, rail has quite a potential, not only for tourist market, also for business travelers. This should be a huge potential market that we have to improve. So in our next slide, you can I have shown a bit what has been going on since this initiative from my state secretary last year. This declaration was presented in the Transport Council of June last year, and as a next step, we have set up this platform of international rail passenger transport. And I'm very happy with this, that all member states are taking part. So we have 27 member states, all the EU member states with railways, but also Switzerland and Norway participating. And in this platform, we invite both sector parties and Commission, European Railway Agency, Shift to Rail, and also OTIF to participate. So we really try to have a holistic approach to look at all the issues which are at stake and what would be the scenarios to improve the situation. So what we have seen is, from our point of view, quite an acceleration of the attention for international rail passengers. After this declaration, we've seen the Commission took it up in its work plan for 2021, that it is mentioned quite clearly in the Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy from December last year. And from this year on, we have the Year of Rail, and we have been able to work quite closely with the Portuguese presidency and present, let's say, the first results already in March, and the let's say the comprehensive report, progress report, we have presented on 3rd of June. So that has that, let's say, is the part of the progress on in the process. And not to forget the last item, the council conclusion on development of rail transport, which has been adopted on 3rd of June, and where also modal shift is a key element, and where also rail distribution plus the role of third-party ticket sellers are explicitly mentioned. So we find that quite important progress. If we go to the next slide, so that is, I show you here a bit the areas where the platform is working. We have defined, in fact, 4 areas, what we call the customer experience and digitalization, the network of, so that the first area is most of what the area we discussed today, with all the aspects on customer experience and service quality. The second one is the network of international passenger services. What are currently the bottlenecks there to develop a good international rail passenger network in the whole European Union and beyond? And what are the initiatives, scenarios that we could take to improve the situation? For example, the initiative by the German colleagues on the Trans-Europe Express, they fit very well under this category of this network of international passenger services. Then on the third element is the EU Green Deal. We have studied the bottlenecks that are still there. So infrastructure, interoperability, rolling stock, and access to rolling stock, still higher costs for rolling stock for international services due to different national and European requirements, so rolling stock was a key issue, infrastructure development was a key issue. Many of this is already on the table, fortunately, in the 10T policy of the European Commission. Nevertheless, we have defined here a few areas where additional attention should be made on international passenger transport. And then fourth category is what we call regulatory framework. We see in practice that there are quite some issues for developing international services due to the fact that different rules apply for example, infrastructure charging, capacity allocation, but also different, let's say, different scope of markets for open access services or public service obligations, public service contracts. And in this group, it has been explored how member states can work together to improve and have a more favorable regulatory framework. And here and there, of course, we could also give some signals on where the regulatory framework at European level could be improved further. So on rail distribution, I would like to mention, of course, also the very important item that not only these governmental documents were mentioned, but also the sector statement was issued. We personally, I think this is one of the biggest achievements in the past year, that the sector, the rail sector, has been meeting with the rail consumers, also with the rail distribution sector, to see where improvements can be made, and that they have presented their statement on 30th of March during the Informal Transport Council. And that is, I think, a very positive result. On the rail distribution in particular, it was agreed in this statement to provide static and dynamic data for international rail journeys, to share data on rail ticketing, and to prepare fair conditions on ticket selling between rail industry and rail distribution parties. So I think given the state of play where we are with the rail distribution, this is really a great achievement. And it is one of the most tangible ways how we can make progress in the short term on the rail passenger market. At the moment, there is still a high impact from the COVID crisis, but in the field of rail distribution, real steps can be made beneficial to passengers, railway undertakings, and the rail distribution market. So for all of them, I believe that real progress can be made here at relative short term. So I'm really happy about this achievement in the sector statement. Then the next slide, please. So I also see a few challenges ahead now. The first is, of course, after this statement, how to make that work from technological point of view, the rail distribution technology and the services to passengers. And here, I think we have already quite some European framework like the TSI telematics applications. We see also activity from innovation like shift to rail or all kinds of private innovations from incumbent railway undertakings, but also others. So there is a lot of technology available, but at the moment we see that the picture is still very diverse. If passengers want to book a journey crossing, let's say 3 or 4 national networks, that is not so easy for passengers to book a ticket still. So technology is one to share this data. And the second one is more, I think, the commercial challenge to enlarge this rail passenger market, to agree on fair conditions between the railway undertaking and third-party ticket sellers, to be able to work together in reaching out to the rail passenger market, to make it easier to book tickets, to make it easier to plan journeys, to make it easier to modify journeys, and so on. And here I'm very happy with this growing cooperation between the two parts of the industry. And altogether, they should both benefit from this enlargement of the market. And here, I think it would be very important to open up, let's say, a table, a conference table, a virtual or physical conference table together, how to make this work, the second challenge. And the third challenge I would like to mention is more the intermodality. I mention here explicitly between air and rail, and the industries should work more together, because passengers are not traveling from an airport to another airport or from a railway station to another railway station. No, they are traveling from home to a holiday address or a business address and so on, and it's much better to serve them from an intermodal way. And of course, here there can be also, in some cases, a replacement from short-haul flights, and we see here important initiatives already at, let's say, national level, but we think at European level it's important to foster this intermodality between air and rail, and to have a more structured initiative. And here it can also be with new business initiatives, like the new business model should emerge where no single industry should be only single standard setting. Mobility as a service is another example of intermodality. In Limburg, it is tested cross-border between rail and urban transport. And in international rail, it may also have a great impact because it makes journeys easier for passengers. So then I come to my fourth and final challenge. I see of course, would be also a chance or an opportunity for rail distribution to improve and to expand the international rail passenger service development. Because market data with the rail distribution, there will be more market data and knowledge about the opportunities for new rail services. In the case of the rail freight market, we see intermodal operators taking, in many cases, the transport risk, and operators are contracting the railway undertakings for new services. It could be that such business model would be also useful in the field of rail passengers, but the importance is that we have room for these kind of innovations where all the parties benefit: passengers, railway undertakings, infrastructure managers, rail distributors. But I'm convinced that with, let's say, a more mature rail distribution market, it should have a good impact also on the rail passenger service development. And that should be a good message for all. So in the platform of international rail passengers, we delivered our progress report, as I mentioned, 3rd of June, and we will continue to work in the next year and the next 2 years. We will support the sector development. We want to work very closely in the agenda together on the areas I mentioned. And we also want to work very closely with the European Commission. We do not want to double in any initiatives, but we want to have complementary actions and initiate only new actions where this is really necessary. So I would like to thank a lot to Travel Tech for your support in the platform so far, and I'm looking forward for the next year. So many thanks for your support, and I wish you further a good conference. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Hinne. And you guys can ask your questions. If you have any questions about that presentation and the data that has just been presented there, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Hinne is sticking around so I can put those to him later on in the panel. But let me introduce our panelists now who are going to be talking about these topics. Panelists, if you can all turn your videos on so we can see your happy smiley faces. So we have with us today Christian Schmidt, who is Director of the Land Transport Directorate in the European Commission's DG Move. We have Christopher Irwin, a board member of the European Passengers Federation. We have James Hanratty, Deputy General Counsel and Head of Regulatory Affairs at the rail platform Trainline. And we have Alexander Gellner, Head of International Distribution and Marketing at Swiss rail operator SBB. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. Christian, I'd like to start out with a question for you. We've talked about some of the initiatives that the Commission is envisioning and also what's been done so far. So maybe you could tell us a bit more. What has the EU already done to make for a more traveler-friendly distribution of rail travel services, and what possible future actions are being envisioned for the future?
Thank you, Dave, and greetings to everyone. And thank you, Hinne, for your presentation. We'll continue to work closely together. In a nutshell, Dave, to answer your question, we've done quite a lot, but clearly we have not done enough. That would be my starting point and my conclusion. What have we done? Just 3 points. At the beginning of this month, the new Rail Passenger Rights Regulation entered into force, and provisions will apply as of June 2023. We are already looking forward to the impact with the provisions and how they will impact the rail ticketing market. So in a nutshell, infrastructure managers and railway undertakings will now have to provide real-time dynamic traffic and travel information, not only to railway undertakings, but also to ticket vendors and tour operators. We think these provisions are of great importance for the offer and distribution of rail services. Second point, what have we done? Well, the fourth railway package provides member states with the possibility to oblige railway undertakings to take part in national schemes. The sector at the time, I recall, argued that it would be better to allow the sector to develop and agree on a solution to solve ticketing and some time was allocated to them to see whether this bottom-up voluntary approach would work. We have heard Hin also mentioned the sector statement of the 30th of March. Like others, we find it very positive to note the stated intentions of the sector for open data, for a longer duration of pre-booking, a level playing field also for selling tickets between undertakings and third-party vendors, etc. But let me put it this way, we are still waiting to see whether these discussions will lead to a result. If not, of course, further EU legislation is possible. And thirdly, what have we done? Well, we are working with the European Railway Agency and within the standardization working groups on technical solutions to meet the multi-modality objective. Let me just stress that we should work on these IT solutions, but IT is not the problem. It's perfectly possible to have these data platforms work together with middleware, etc. So IT is not the obstacle here to get to what we all look for, a strong common intermodal platform. So then finally, looking forward, what will we do? We will later this year present an action plan on passenger rail, boosting long distance cross-border passenger rail. That will cover many issues, many of the bottlenecks that are left behind after the fourth railway package, and it will include also an action on ticketing. As I said, we are still assessing whether the sector is going to be able to deliver solutions as set out in the sector statement. But if not, we are certainly happy to give it a push. Point 2, for 2022, we are planning to review the delegated regulation 2017-1926, supporting the development of multimodal travel information services. We consider it relevant to enhance access to information data and address technical challenges related to standardization and data sharing. So the multimodal option will certainly be pursued. And then finally, we also plan to, with respect to the revision of rail telematics applications for passenger services, we plan to address the issue of retail data exchange in the rail sector and to provide technical means to implement the obligation of the 2021 rail passenger rights regulation. So that, Dave, in a nutshell, is what we have done so far. We made good progress, but clearly, I think we all agree, and I welcome this discussion. I really look forward to hearing the experts of the sector state their views, but the lack of easy ticketing options, let it be clear, is still an obstacle for travelers to use the train. And unless we address this issue, I am not sure that we will see the boost in passenger rail that we all need to see as a result of the green objectives that we have set for ourselves. With that, thank you, and back to you.
Thanks, Christian. It's really good to hear that the Commission recognizes the problem and is taking it seriously. Christopher, let's go to you next. You are here to represent the rail passengers, the people on the ground experiencing the difficulties in these ticketing issues. So when it comes to distribution, what are the main frustrations of passengers who are looking for rail tickets? Christopher, you're on mute. You want to unmute yourself?
Someone keeps on controlling my screen and taking off my video and so on. So what we're after is, I'm unmuted now? And
Yep, you're good now.
Yeah, but I've got something on my screen saying I'm muted. So
you're okay.
Whoever's controlling my screen, can you just desist for a moment while I talk? Firstly, thank you very much for having me here. EPF, as you probably know, represents passenger associations throughout Europe. More than 20 European states have organizations who are affiliated to EPF. I think it's very simple. As a passenger's representative, what I want, I think, is what almost every other passenger wants. I want to be able to travel hassle-free. I want to be able to travel conveniently. When I buy my tickets, I want buying my tickets to be convenient, and I want to be sure that I've got a competitive price for what I'm buying. Let me give an example of this. Christian himself actually wrote me a letter 3 days ago inviting me to take part in a conference he's organizing in Berlin at the end of September in connection with the express train connecting Europe Express. And the first thing I did was think, well, how can I do this affordably? I went to Amadeus.net and looked at the flights. I live 1,300 kilometers away from Berlin, so it's naturally a flight journey. And there I got a fantastic array of options from very low prices to high prices to good times to bad times, everything that one can dream of when one's making a travel purchase. I then thought to myself, hold on a second, I'm going to a rail conference, and anyway, flying at the moment isn't terribly attractive. There are stories of great queues at airports while people are checked for COVID-19 symptoms. And also, it's not very good to fly. It's environmentally not very wise. I'll go by rail. And I've done rail to Berlin many times before, but I went online to try and find something by rail. And although I'm expert in doing these things myself, I went to various websites, and it was virtually impossible to find a consistent offering anywhere. The sort of problems I hit were straightforward. They were the inability of different systems to communicate with one another. If I traveled to Berlin, I'd go by Great Western Railways to London, I'd travel by Eurostar to Brussels or Amsterdam perhaps, and then I'd go on by Deutsche Bahn. But the coordination of those sites doesn't exist. There is no way you can plan a through ticket simply on one site involving multiple operators. So big challenge there. Next challenge I had was in terms of identifying prices. It was very hard to find the optimum price, even by going to different websites, trying to put things together and so on. And the next problem I hit is, even if I do buy a cheap Eurostar ticket and a bargain Spa price Deutsche Bahn ticket and a good advanced purchase Great Western ticket, I've got no certainty of contract supply. I won't be assured that if something goes wrong with the journey, I'll get continuation without having to buy an entirely new fare. Now, I know there's something called the Journey Continuation Agreement. It's a rather secret agreement. It's been put together by a number of railway companies and the CIT. And in fact, I've got a copy of it. But most passengers can't get a copy of it. It's a confidential document. And although it gives me personally some assurance, it's not made available to the wider traveling public. So you think, do I want to make a rail journey if I'm suddenly going to find my Eurostar arrival in Brussels is late? I miss the Deutsche Bahn train on from there. Will I be able to travel on without paying an enormous sum of money? So again, an unhelpful approach. What I'm looking for is something that is really just as simple as traveling by air is when it comes to buying tickets. And I think without that, air will have a competitive advantage on rail, and international rail is just not going to get a look in terms of extending its market share beyond the 1% of international travel that international rail passenger travel in Europe currently represents. It's got to do better. And that's why I commend the fantastic advances made, and both Hinner and Christian referred to it, the advances made in the commitments given by the sector, with the consumers, with organizations like EPF, to improving the package being offered. A series of commitments in the sector statement that really should be the basis of future policy. But, and this is my final point, but I'm really worried, because although the sector has worked together very well over the last 8 months, and we've really come up with some really good constructive thoughts, I'm also aware that in private, some are still pushing back. I have to remember that the rail sector in Europe gets subsidy from government of something between 50 and 100 billion euros a year, and yet claims the right to commercial freedom. You can't have commercial freedom if you're dependent on the state, on public subsidy. The public subsidy is paid for by taxpayers, by citizens, by passengers. We deserve to get the recognition that our money should bring. We need simple, hassle-free travel. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Christopher. So let's now go to the other side of the ticket booking experience on the other end. So we have James from Trainline. James, how can multimodal digital mobility services make rail more attractive for passengers and in so doing increase rail's modal share?
Well, thank you, Dave, and to EU Travel Tech and to the previous speakers. I mean, the first thing to say is I can't tell you how encouraged I am by what I've already heard this morning. The work that Hina has been doing on the platform and the sector statement, the intent shown by Christian at the EU Commission level to push this forward, and then the problem statement just described by Christopher from the passenger perspective speaks to exactly what Trainline is here to solve, to make that sort of journey easy, intuitive, attractive for passengers. So so I very much welcome the opportunity to be here and to help drive these initiatives forward. Very briefly, for those who may not know Trainline, and I hope that most will, we are the leading independent rail and coach travel platform. Our EU headquarters are in Paris. And via our websites and apps, we bring together millions of routes via rail and coach carriers across 45 countries. So our objectives here are entirely in line with the things I've heard already and in line with the EU Green Deal, of course, as well. But coming to your question, Dave, I think there are maybe two elements to it. I think the first element is, well, what are platforms like Trainline already doing to increase modal share and improve the attractiveness of rail, and then what more can we do? So I think on the first question, digital mobility platforms like Trainline are rail tech experts. We are here to develop digital solutions to the sort of problems that Christopher described. We want all carriers in one platform in order to make life easier for passengers. And I'd just like to use a very recent case study of Spain, where we've had a recent introduction of a new carrier, Ouigo España. And what we have seen on the Barcelona to Madrid route is fascinating. We have seen in the last few weeks 3 times more sales on that particular route from Ouigo España than from the incumbent Renfe in the same period. And what that tells us is that passengers value the comparison, the ability to see all carriers in one place for a particular route without having to switch between different contexts to understand whether they're getting the best price and the best option. And it also tells us not only that passengers like it, but also that new entrants like Ouigo España need independent distribution channels like Trainline to thrive, to enter the market. So I think it's a fascinating little case study of why we help the world, why we're bringing value to passengers and to the rail market in general. And I know a lot of the discussion so far has been about international journeys, cross-border journeys, but we shouldn't lose sight of the importance within particular member states as well, like Spain. And let me give another quick example of the sort of innovation we provide. In France, we were the first to offer a service which uses data and technology to assist passengers in obtaining compensation if your train is late. We know that less than 1/3 of French people claim compensation when they're entitled to it because their train is late, because it's too difficult. They don't know how to do it. It's complicated. So we've created a product which allows that process to be obtained easily. We provide the data, we provide the information needed for the customer to make the claim, and guess what? More people are making it. And I'd be interested in Christopher's perspective on that from the passenger side as well. So look, just a couple of little examples of what digital mobility platforms, ticket vendors are already doing to make life better for rail passengers in Europe. But, and the second part to the question you asked, Dave, is, you know, what more can we do? Well, there is only so much we can do without the right incentives and commercial terms. we need to ensure that ticket vendors, digital mobility platforms licensed by RUs always get access to all fares, all data on non-discriminatory and fair terms. And that is not always the case at the moment. In many markets, the RUs will retain data, products, and the best terms for its own distribution channels. And needless to say, for that reason, I'm very encouraged about what I've heard this morning. I very much welcome the work that Hina has been doing with the international platform, and the sector statement as well, which and Hina read from it. But the commitment at a European level to ensure a level playing field between railway undertakings and third-party ticket vendors is key here, absolutely key here. And that's not just for international journeys, that must also be for domestic journeys. And then the direction of travel we've heard from Christian already. I very much welcome to move that statement, that commitment, into a regulatory framework to ensure that those principles are enshrined in law. I think will go a long way to ensuring that the sort of innovations, the sort of progress I've described in a couple of markets there are available to all passengers across all European markets, because the right incentives, the right terms are in place for ticket vendors to continue to provide that critical innovation and bringing carriers together and improving the life of rail passengers.
Thanks a lot. I think that's a really good point you make about domestic rail, because we do tend to focus very much on cross-border rail when we're talking about these issues, because that's where a lot of the big problems lie. But also when we think about the theoretical lack of problems in domestic markets, we're maybe thinking about those markets where the rail is more developed and not, in Eastern Europe, for instance. And as you say, even in the markets where rail is very well developed, like in Spain, there are still cost issues, big cost issues. And so liberalizing that can actually be helpful for consumers to actually get those train prices down to a level that's competitive with air, which is really the big key issue here. Let's go to Alexander next to hear the perspective of the railways. So Alexander, we heard from some of the other panelists there that there is some feeling that the railways are not fully engaged in this. And of course, that varies immensely by country, I imagine. What are the railways, and SBB in particular, doing to make multimodal ticketing and ticketing involving international operators easier?
Thanks, Dave, and thanks also for EUTT for having me on this panel, and thanks also to the other speakers who highlighted the challenges and the objectives from various perspectives that we're facing from a railway perspective. So the short answer to your question, Dave, is railways are standardizing, opening up and expanding the technical backbone that we need to distribute our offers. And now Christian said technology is not the obstacle. Correct, it should not be the obstacle, but it is an important enabler. It's not the only enabler, but it is an important one to make sure the objectives that various of my other panelists highlighted can be tackled. So from a railway perspective, we have been working a lot in the past years to standardize this technical backbone, by which I mean when I think of this technical backbone, I think of 4 different elements, if you want. There's obviously the timetable that everybody needs to make sure to know how to get from A to B. There is everything related to the distribution and the tariff data that we need to actually build the ticket. And then from a railway perspective, a very important part is also the control infrastructure, so we can make sure that we get the revenues from the passengers that are taking our trains. And in all those 4 areas, we have been working intensively, and also I have to say quite successfully in the past years to get to a point where I can say we've done our homework, and it's now about implementing all these different initiatives that we have been working on and brought to a maturity that is actually already quite impressive. On the timetable, issue we've had for quite a few years, or even decades actually, I have to say, the tried and trusted database called Merits that everybody in the railway industry, the carriers have been using for a while to exchange the timetable data in a consistent manner. About 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we opened this database up to other parties, third-party distributors such as Trainline, Amadeus, everybody who is interested in this actually. They are now able to access these data, to buy these data, and use them for their purposes. And the next big thing in this context is, and I think Hine mentioned it already, is the dynamic data. So the real-time data that exists in various shapes and forms already on domestic levels. Almost all carriers have them in some way, shape, or form. Now the challenge is really to bring those together in a consistent format, on a consistent and coherent platform for everybody to use. On the other end of the spectrum, if you want, the control side of things, which from a customer perspective, obviously, if I look at Christopher, is probably the least sexy part of the story of traveling by train, but is obviously critical for railways. We have also built a common database, a common infrastructure for us to share the data necessary to control the tickets. And we have also agreed on a modern version of a barcode that can be used both on paper tickets, but also all the way up to the screen tickets that are now more and more commonplace. And then in the center of this is the distribution and tariff data capabilities. And there we have been working and the first time actually that railways have really been working in a concrete way together with ticket vendors such as Trainline, Amadeus, and others on a common set of technical specifications that allow everybody to access the ticketing data of railways. It's called OSDM. Without going any further into the technical details, it's available to everybody. The specifications can be downloaded, can be used, can be built into any technical sales platform that's out there. And we as railways are now starting to implement this. There's already a few examples. It will take a while due to the complexity of things, of course, but we are getting real with this, and it's not just on paper. It's really happening in our sales systems. So coming back to your question. This is what we're doing, standardizing, opening up, also expanding is to intermodal, because that's also the name of the game, obviously. Our timetable information, we already have a few buses in there, so that you can already call intermodal, but obviously there's a lot more to do. But the more standardized we get, obviously, the easier it also becomes to add more information. OSDM also is meant to be expanded also into intermodal aspects. There are working groups between UIC and IATA, the industry associations of the railways and flight industry that are working also on a common set of specifications. So there's a lot of things going on. I think we heard the message as railways, and we're getting serious about implementing concrete solutions that will also benefit passengers in a very short amount of time.
Great, thanks. It's good to hear the railways have heard the message. I think that's going to be a reassuring message to a lot of people. So let's talk a bit about the EU's regulatory framework on this. I talked about some of the initiatives that have taken place so far, and Christian also walked us through those. Christian, let me just go back to you as a follow-up to what you said in your first answer there. What's the receptiveness like among national governments to this? Obviously, as Christopher mentioned, there is a big intersection between national governments and these rail companies. And so their buy-in is needed, not just to approve the regulatory framework, but also to be the subject that's being regulated. So do you think there is a consensus among EU member states on the way forward on this?
I think so, and I hope so. You saw the June Council conclusions that welcomed the Commission's intention to present an action plan on this. There was a sense of urgency of boosting international passenger rail. There is a revival of train, broadly speaking, And I think governments understand that one of the key advantages of rail right now is the European dimension, and the need to make the still fairly national systems become much more integrated. We are building a single European railway area, and we don't have one. I agree entirely with Christopher's description, and I hope he will join us in Berlin by rail. But I sympathize entirely with his difficulties. So these are issues that I certainly hope our politicians will recognize, that we cannot talk about the Green Deal in these warm and fussy terms unless we also have the necessary political will to address these technical issues. While I have the floor, I have two issues I think we should also be talking about. I think it's perfectly understandable that there are fears among the railway undertakings of losing control of their revenue streams, because this is about others selling services for them. I just want to say that what is needed, of course, here is a clearinghouse. British Railways in the 19th century, operating independently, had a clearinghouse system. In the 19th century, the aviation sector, Amadeus was mentioned, has had it for more than 30 years. You sell your ticket and it connects with another operator. There is a system for it. Interrail, I mean, I grew up with Interrail, and I'm sitting here in this chair because I took a train from Denmark to Paris, and that was the beginning of my European dimension. Interrail has a clearinghouse system, right? You buy a ticket, you can go all around Europe, and then there's a system to reimburse the participating countries. So that's why, Alexander, I said I don't think IT is the issue. These systems exist, and I'm very encouraged to hear you say that you're working on it, because I think it's very important that we don't sort of get distracted by, oh, it's very complicated. It's not. It's doable. It's a question of cooperation between all the operators. So that's on the sort of the revenue, and our objective must really be to convince all the railway undertakings that there will be a bigger pie to share of these revenues. There will be more revenues, and a clearinghouse will. The second issue I think we should also be discussing. I mean, we have Trainline here, very nice company, European, etc. I think there is a fear among the rail sector, and I somehow sympathize that if they lose control of their distribution channels to Google or to these big tech companies, that's not what we were sort of aiming at, I think. So there is an issue there of a fear of losing control of your sales system. And I find that probably you will find very few companies who would be willing to do that, lose control of your distribution system. So that must also be addressed in dealing with the sector here. So just those 2 points on the table. Dave, back to you.
Thanks. I want to get both James's and Alexander's reaction to that. Alexander, let's get yours first. I mean, do you agree that there is this fear of losing control of distribution channels? And maybe you could also comment on the receptiveness among national governments.
I can only talk for SBB now. We have never perceived companies such as Trainline, Amadeus, and also Google as a pure threat. There's always a threat and an opportunity, and we've been working with Trainline, James, for I don't know 5-6 years or so, and very happily so, because if we do it right, then what these companies can do for us, they can help us engage and penetrate market segments that we as railways probably cannot penetrate as easily as they can. Yeah. So yes, there are other voices in our industry. There are other carriers who have different perspectives. Fair enough. But I can only speak for myself. So this part, I think, is one where competition definitely must play, not on the technical backbone side. That's what I'm saying. What I said before, we need to standardize the backbone, and let competition play on the level above. And then when it comes to this notion of clearing houses and so on, I think this is where we're getting at with this OSDM initiative. It's not clearinghouse, not in the sense that there's some kind of central instance that does it all, all for us and so on, but being able in principle to share data in a very easy way for everybody interested in it. I think that's the name of the game. We shouldn't make the mistake to create central / monopolistic instances of platforms that distribute everything as they wish. We should let competition play on the commercial side and again standardize on the technical side. Yeah. And we from SBB, sorry Dave, we from SBB and we have quite a few other railways as well who think the same way. We welcome these initiatives also from the political side, because they also help us shape our thinking. What we ask for is support in implementation. Like I said, we've done the homework. We really need some support in implementing this because it is not easy.
James, what's your reaction to this idea that rail operators are afraid of losing their distribution channels?
Yeah, such an interesting question. And first of all, I agree with Alexander. We've had a long and strong relationship with SBB, so that's not the issue. So I think we need to distinguish between what the likes of Trainline does and the Google or the GAFA example. Trainline is a specialist rail retailer. We provide all rail carriers in one place. We provide customer support in multiple languages. We allow people to purchase rail tickets in 10 different currencies. We are a specialist rail end-to-end ticket vendor. That's not what Google does, right? And so what we are asking for here is for those ticket vendors who are providing that distribution service and that specialism with a commercial agreement from the railways to operate on a level playing field. We're not asking for preferential terms, anything special. We just want to operate with a fair and reasonable set of conditions. But we are different from the types of entities that was described by Christian. I think that's important to recognize. So that would be my first reaction. My second reaction, well, let me just deal with the clearinghouse piece, because I think it is interesting, and Christian's right, of course, that they have a system of that nature in UK Rail, which allocates revenue amongst the railways for journeys that have been taken. But that's the sort of back end process. What's also needed is the data and the access at the front end to the user interface, to the apps, to the platforms that are selling these products on reasonable commercial terms to allow the passengers to see at a glance the best option that they have and to receive their entitlements, whether it's compensation or change of journey, all the things that Christopher mentioned, in a simple user interface. So I agree with the clearinghouse concept, but it also needs to come together at the front end, the retail side as well. And let me make one final point on the technical standardization to which Alexander referred. Look, we welcome all of that, of course. Anything that makes life simpler to connect to railways, data and systems has to be welcomed, and we encourage all of that and welcome it. But I'm also sympathetic with the statement that Christian made earlier, which is technology is not the problem, or at least not the main problem. We at Trainline have already connected to multiple carrier interfaces, including SBB and many others, even though there's no standardization. The key challenge we need to address is the market pillar, the terms upon which digital platforms, ticket vendors can operate. If we can get that right, then we create the incentives to solve all of the customer problems that Christopher described earlier.
Christopher, let me get you to react to all of that from a passenger's perspective. Of course, the passenger is sitting here looking at the different business players saying, you know, okay, just sort it because I want my tickets. And then also, Christopher, I wonder if you could give your impression of national governments, whether they're receptive to these ideas, and maybe you could even name and shame which national governments you think are the least receptive.
Okay, thank you. That's a great challenge. I think, you know, like everyone here, the way to start is to ask the question that every passenger advocate asks when looking at a new proposal, and that's what's in it for the passenger? What's in it for the consumer? That's the starting point. I mean, yes, I'm interested in the technology, but that's perverse of me, really, because actually, as a passenger, I shouldn't be interested in technology. We can talk about clearinghouses. I can talk a lot about clearinghouses. I can tell you the first transport clearinghouse was at something called the Golden Cross Pub in Trafalgar Square in London in 1791. It was established to enable people to travel by different stagecoach operators between London and York, a city, what, 350 kilometers north of London, 1791. And that grew off the back of clearinghouses. So, you know, in a way, when we talk about clearinghouses, we're talking about 200-year-old concepts and or more than 200-year-old concepts. And really, we've got to move on, because one of the problems that rail has as a sector is it's still in the, I was going to say, in the steam age. It's still in a previous era. What I can do with other modes, what I do in my normal retailing experiences, what I do when I engage with commercial operators in the whole range of retail activities is customer focused. And I think that rail has still to learn to be customer focused. Let me throw out a provocative remark, which I've made over the years several times, and quite often in discussions with the Commission, with friends in the Commission in the past. I wonder, is retailing too important to be left to the operators? If I want to go and buy a packet of organic eggs and I want them to be fresh, I don't go to my local farm gate. I go to Lidl or Tesco or some other retailer, because I know that their interest is ensuring I have a really good product. The farmer may be trying to get rid of something that has been knocking around the barn for a few weeks that I don't really want. I go to the retailer who's a professional in retailing. And what I see with the rail sector is it hasn't yet developed that real professionalism in retailing where the customer is the absolute focus of all that is done. And I think it's therefore an open question. Yes, you can separate wheel and rail by taking infrastructure management away from railway operation, from railway undertakings. Yes, you can do that. But isn't the most important question, how do you relate to the customer? Should retailing be left with operators, or is it too important for that? Now, I pose that as an open question because one of the things that's really inspired me in the last 8 months is chairing along with CER, the sector mirror group to which Hina and others have referred. And indeed, I have on my desk all the time the document to which people refer. It's a fantastic document. You can see I've underlined things in the past in it. And if you go through that list, those are commitments. But what we've got to do is turn the sector into realizing those commitments. They've signed up to them, but they've got to deliver them. Are they capable of delivering them? And here we come to the political question. One of the things I've been struck by over the years is that some incumbent operators particularly have I think, an unhealthy relationship with their sponsoring national governments. Now, why is it I can't buy a through ticket between London and Berlin anymore? Frankly, it's because the interfaces between the SNCF dominated systems and the Deutsche Bahn dominated systems are now incompatible. And people want to protect their legacy investments. Great if you're a railway official, lousy if you're a passenger. We've got to tackle this. And I would say to the Commission, can you not find some way of weaving into the legislative programme the commitments the sector as a whole, with the consumer bodies, have entered into in the statement we put out on 30th of March from the sector mirror group in the context of the platform. If you can do that, if that becomes, as it were, enshrined as a charter, of rail development, then I think rail might have some prospect of getting away from the appallingly low market share it's had for the last 20, 30 years, and actually building back greener, building back better, building back in a way that is really appreciated by the end users, and through that is appreciated by those who fund the railways, not just the fare payers, but the governments who pump in probably £100 billion euros a year of subsidy. That's a big challenge. Can the Commission move forward on it? My real worry is when I read the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, when I read paragraph 92, for example, of staff working document, I'm struck that the proposals are tentative, and I know very well that there will be pushback from that. The industry will push back because in the end, it's not yet committed to putting passengers first. We need the Commission to be resolute, to take forward the germs of good ideas it's sown and make sure it's reality for everyone's benefit. Thank you.
Alexander, let me get you to respond to that question that was posed. Is distribution too important to be done by the operators?
Okay, let me answer this like that. We are customer focused. Believe me, believe us, believe me. It is at the core of our thinking is the customer. What we need to differentiate, I think, is domestic market versus cross-border market here. At SBB, the international the international passenger traffic accounts for roughly about 10% of the entire passenger traffic. This is by international standards a lot. Yeah? There are other countries where international traffic is about 5% or even less of the entire cake. So 10% is already a lot, but there's 90% that is made up by the domestic traffic. Yeah. So if we want to make good use of our taxpayers' money, obviously we are also expected to focus on domestic markets first and foremost. That is the challenge that we always have when we talk about cross-border traffic. And it's not because we're not customer focused, it's because we have to prioritize our respective domestic markets first. And that leads to what Christopher rightly said, to the effects that, yes, SNCF focuses on their systems, Deutsche Bahn focuses on their systems, and SBB focuses on our systems. That is clear. So that's what I said in the beginning. The challenge now is to build connections to these necessarily proprietary systems. Yeah, and I keep coming back to this point. There is an element of technology in there, unfortunately, even though it shouldn't be in the end interesting at all to customers. But we need to fix this first and foremost on a technical level, and of course then also on a commercial level, to make sure that these systems work together. And the solution to this is, as I said at the beginning, is the OSDM initiative that we have launched and are now about to implement. So what we need is not any kind of central clearinghouse. Is actually also not more regulation. We need support in implementing what we have built now so far on paper. And now we need support to do this also in practice. If I go to my IT colleagues and said, okay, I want to implement OSDM in our systems, then they will say, well, I mean, there's 9, 10, 50 other projects before on the domestic level which are relevant to our Swiss customers. Please wait. Yeah, we need support also from the industry and also from the regulatory level, quite frankly, to make sure that we get this through. Yeah, every single carrier has the same challenges, and it's nothing to do with lack of customer focus or is it too important to leave to the carriers. We fully understand that the customer is at the center of our thinking, and we have done the homework. Now we need support to actually implement it. That is the message. Yeah.
So I want to go to the questions that have come in from the audience. Just a reminder, you guys can ask your questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom. But before I go to the questions from the audience, I did want to ask about one of the big issues that we all talk about when it comes to EU rail issues, which is liberalization, which is such a contentious topic, I think, in EU rail circles. But James, I wanted to ask you, what effect has rail liberalization, and thinking in particular in the UK, had on distribution platforms? Has it helped or hurt the situation? Do third-party independent rail operators, having more of them who are private, does that make it actually easier or more difficult?
So I think of it the other way around. I think that independent distributors have helped liberalization. So the reason that the passenger numbers have grown or one of the reasons passenger numbers have grown in the UK over the last 10 years, leaving COVID aside, is because there is a thriving distribution sector, an independent distribution sector, and Christopher mentioned it, where the retailer is the specialist retailer. I think as we see different markets in Europe go the same way, and I used the case study earlier of Wigo España entering the Spanish market, we're now beginning to see the same. Oh, my lights have gone off. Excuse me. We're now beginning to see the same things emerging, where passengers are benefiting from the role that independent retailers provide, and liberalization is benefiting from the role independent retailers provide. And to use another example, is a slightly smaller example maybe, but in Germany, if you go to Deutsche Bahn, you can only buy the Deutsche Bahn products for German travel. If you go to Flixtrain, you can only buy Flixtrain. If you go to Trainline or another independent retailer, you can see them both side by side. So I think of independent retailers as the enabler, the engine that allows liberalization to bloom and to blossom. And without that, you're not going to get it, because passengers are going to have to jump between different websites and different apps to try to find, have I got the best product, I've got the best deal, and like, who wants that? So I think of it the other way around, Dave, that actually it's the platforms, it's the independent retailers that enable liberalization. And of course, then there's a benefit to the platform, because people want to use the platform because it works. But yeah, I think that the flow in my mind is the other way around.
Did anyone else want to comment on that liberalization issue? Christian?
I feel I must, speaking for the European Commission. Well, obviously, the fourth railway package, we haven't yet seen all the benefits of the market openings, and some of them have been hampered by COVID. New entrants that were planning or had just started have faced a very difficult time, and some have suspended their services. So we have the legislation only now coming in the middle of a pandemic. But already now you see the signs of spring, with new services being announced. Some have been mentioned, etc. Look, I think liberalization of the aviation sector, because it came first, we now have low-cost airlines, and that's one of the reasons why long-distance passenger rail and night trains have faced a very hard time. The problem is certainly not liberalization in the rail sector; it's that it came too late. And we talk a lot about the digital dimension. If you just take a look at what applications, geolocalization, and the customer-oriented use of platforms in urban transport, look what that has done for Uber and for Bolt, and all these services completely transformed the demand for domestic urban mobility, and taxis, clinging on to the existing market. That sort of transformational development is possible in rail as well. So it's certainly not a question of market opening, etc., not delivering. It is delivering, but it needs also to address all the technical barriers to entry that we are discussing here, that are hidden in software and in cooperation between all the legacy systems. I agree with Christopher that in many ways rail is still in the steam area. That's very romantic, but we need to move to the 21st century. Thank you.
Indeed, romantic, but not very helpful for a passenger. Okay, so let's go to the Q&As from the questions from the audience. We have a question from Christian Moeller. It is also related actually to what you were just saying, Christian, about the comparisons to the aviation sector. So Christian says, I understand the need for a clearinghouse, but who should run it? Let's avoid the mistakes in aviation where IATA monopolist dictate rules. This must be different in rail. I'll open that up to the panel. Who should run a clearinghouse? Who'd like to answer that?
And I can.
Go ahead.
But my take is, as I said before, I don't think of it in terms of a central clearinghouse. I think we need to, as railways, we need to make our inventory, our data available to those who want to sell it. That's the competition I referred to before. That part I think we have understood. And then let the market play. I don't think there is the need of a central clearinghouse that distributes these data in some kind of central way. As long as we all make our information, our data available, as James said before, in obviously indiscriminatory terms and so on and so forth, then we're already there. Yeah. But because I agree with Christian who asked the question, who should run it? What should this be? I mean, should this be some kind of central? What's the governance? Who owns it? Who develops it further? You know, building it is one thing, but running it and evolving it is the other thing. I don't think this is the solution, quite frankly.
Anyone else?
Well, I could try and give an answer if I may. I see a clearinghouse as no more than a system. It doesn't need to be anything physical. It could just be a series of exchanges. But I come back to my core thought that have we got the place where liberalization is having greatest impact at the right point in the spectrum? Yes, thinking back to market opening in the European context, I think there were some great benefits from it. But I now ask myself, looking forward, does the rail wheel split, does that interface now not seem rather dated, rather 1990s, 1980s, 1990s thinking? Because if I'm thinking about the other great problem facing rail passengers, price, I'm thinking about getting economies, getting efficiencies, and efficiencies to me, as technology develops, point towards things like recognizing that intelligence is shifting from infrastructure to vehicles. So your trains actually do the monitoring of the condition of track and other assets. And if that happens, you've got the real problem to face. Where do you put the control? Does it make sense to have the split between infrastructure managers and railway undertakings? That's one example. My second example is, yeah, I personally think that if you are going to talk about rail as a coherent system, you need to think of collaboration rather than competition being the primary focus. You need collaboration between systems. So public transport as a whole is a system of systems. We've got to find a better way of dealing with the future needs of public transport users than the fragmentary approach we've taken up till now. Except, and here I come back to my core argument, that if the railway operators cannot get their focus right, cannot put passengers first and foremost of all they do, perhaps you need to put the split between the retailing side, who, if you like, commission from the operators the things the operators are good at doing, running trains at times reliably, efficiently, and so on. And that may be the way forward for liberalisation. But it's fascinating in the UK, in the last few months, there's been quite a significant tracking back from the liberalisation that characterised the railway system in the UK for the last 25 years. And I wonder whether that may be a sign of things to come. To me, the real challenge is how does the transport sector generally cope with the emergence of the Googles and the Amazons, the big American suppliers that I suspect could get into the transport market, even if not the mode, and take away the business if the transport operators don't pull up their socks and do something rather more innovative and passenger focused than they have done over centuries. Thank you.
And maybe if I may briefly on that, I mean, I think I've hopefully already dealt with why I believe that the specialist platforms like Trainline shouldn't be a concern. They're different from the Googles and others. We're here to provide an end-to-end service to customers and provide that improvement in retailing experience. But just if I may, on the clearinghouse, I agree with Alexander that I don't think that's the biggest problem. You know, Trainline already sells combined journeys. We sell tickets, or we sell tickets for journeys that involve more than one carrier. And we do that seamlessly, so a passenger can buy it in a single transaction. In the background, the revenue for that journey is being allocated by Trainline through its connections to those separate carriers, proportionately to the journey or in accordance with the rules that have been applied. Now that takes some work, of course, because you have to create the rules, you have to do the connections, but it is possible technically without a clearinghouse. And I think that's key. The biggest barrier is that the commercial terms that ticket vendors operate under aren't always fair. And so the ability to invest and to scale that across Europe to make this a seamless experience where retailers are adding value to the rail sector and growing the pie, that's the challenge. And that is the call here that I think we've seen from the sector statement, the recognition that that's an issue, that it needs to be solved. And I think that's where the EU Commission can concentrate its powers, energies, to ensure that to ensure that if this element is dealt with, then I think a lot of the problems that have been described by Christopher and by others will be solved. I say humbly, Christian, but that is my perspective.
We have a last question for Christian here. This one comes from Ian Chaplin. If the sector doesn't deliver on the commitments set out in the sector statement, what tools or levers does the Commission have to address this?
Unlimited powers, of course. We are European Commission. Look, I think we have heard some very positive voices here. We are not going to put ourselves at the place of the sector. We're not going to be a central body running a clearinghouse and things like that. But there is an overriding European interest here for this issue to be solved. I would urge the sector to make progress on the objectives set out in the sector statement. And I will be very open to discuss with the sector whether this is something that should be given a backbone in a regulation, etc. But I think it's important that the characteristics of this system is defined by the sector, the people who are running these systems. And yes, by all means, it is something that we can sort of enshrine in EU regulation. But let's accelerate the work on the initiative that is ongoing. Let the sector statement be implemented. And as I said in my opening statement, we stand ready to support it, but we also stand ready to push it. I think I'll leave it at that.
Great. Well, now we're going to have some concluding remarks by our MEP guest, the Green Swedish MEP Jakob Dalunde, who's been following this conversation. He's going to give his perspective from lawmakers' perspective from the European Parliament. Jakob?
Thank you so much, Dave. And I've been listening now to the discussion, and we've had very many good perspectives and proposals. But the sad truth is that the main reason why so little of this is becoming realized is that we're stuck in the wrong mindset in terms of policymakers, both on the EU level and on the national level. We're still perceiving rail travel as something that we do regionally and nationally, sometimes internationally between Copenhagen and Malmö, between Brussels and Amsterdam, between Strasbourg and Offenburg. But long distance international travel is still viewed as a very niche product, something for train enthusiasts like myself. I've spent my entire life interrailing through the summers, exploring Europe, and I'm just now in 2 hours taking the train from Brussels to Duisburg, up to Hamburg, Copenhagen, Malmö, and then to Stockholm to celebrate midsummer back in Sweden. And I understand that currently I am a very niche audience, but if we are going to meet our Paris obligations, this can't continue. I fully realize that at the moment for train operators, long distance international travel is very small part of the tickets that they sell, but sustainable aviation is a long way to go. And electric cars for long distance is a no-go. If we want to continue to have good mobility in Europe and to be sustainable, railways are the solutions. And if we're going to enable long distance cross-border traveling, if we want to more than just train enthusiasts who know how to do, which websites to go to, how to book, how to deal with delays and rebooking, if we want a normal family with children who are feeling climate anxiety and saying, honey, this time let's do an interrailing. When they realize how difficult that is and what happens if they manage to book a long distance cross-border journey, and for example, if they go from Stockholm and they want to go to Venice, they are on time with the Swedish railways down to Copenhagen, but then the Danish railway company delays them from Copenhagen to Hamburg, and they're going to catch the night train down to Innsbruck, and then they are delayed, and the Deutsche Bahn or ÖBB in their corporation say, well, Danish DSB delayed you. We don't have any responsibility for that, and then they are stranded at Hamburg Hauptbahnhof, having to deal with that situation themselves. That won't work. We need to make sure that independent ticket sellers have the possibility to network into all operators' booking systems and have the possibility to legally book through tickets where the traveler have the certainty that they will get to the end destinations and that the operators will sort out the financial complications of delays between themselves, as it's currently happening for aviation. In the previous mandate, I, together with my German colleague Michael Kramer, we actually gathered a majority in the European Parliament in the Parliament's report on rail passenger rights to secure this. We required all European train operators to provide open APIs for independent ticket sellers to do this, and for them to be able to sell legally binding through tickets where the passenger rights continue through all the legs. Sadly, that was shut down in the trilogues because the member states did not see the benefits of that. We need to continue fighting on this and make sure that we have proper European legislation which requires train operators to let independent ticket sellers to sell proper through tickets, and to shift this mindset from train to being the regional and national perspective to being the European perspective. This will enable mobility in a sustainable way for the coming decades. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jakob. So as I mentioned at the beginning of our session, this is the last session in the Travel Your Way series. This brings us to a conclusion. I want to thank today's panelists for some great insights, super interesting topic, and definitely going to be a really interesting thing to watch. Before we close, I'd like to hand it back over to Emmanuel to give us a fond farewell to the Travel Your Way series.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Well, I would like to thank also panelists. I have to say I'm quite hopeful after this discussion, because when you see the level of engagement of all parties, from the consumers to the railway undertakings, passing by the distributors, to go towards a more attractive rail travel and a more attractive rail distribution, I see there is a way forward, and I trust Christian to bring us there all together. But there is really common determination to get there. Well, I would like to thank all the attendees of this webinar and of all the other webinars. It has been a fascinating journey for EU Travel Tech to go through all those issues related to sustainable travel. I think we'll have other opportunities to discuss them. I will be able to do it not through a web, but with a real event where you will be in the same room discussing together. That's clearly my wish second half of the year. But so you'll hear from us very soon. And I thank you for your time. And I thank again the panelists for their participation. Thanks a lot and a very good day.